Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedback episode 31. Today, we are really excited to be here talking with the wonderful Ryan Carter, composer extraordinaire, and also the wonderful Judy Lochhead, musicologist extraordinaire as well. So thank you both for joining us. We're going to be talking today about Ryan's piece for us, When All Else Fails, which is featured on a portrait recording that was released by Kairos in 2019. I believe I'm right about that date. And just to let you know, those of you who are watching, if you'd like to submit questions, you can always do that ahead of time by emailing us at feedback@yarnwire.org, or you can join the live chat on Facebook or YouTube if you'd like to ask a question in real time. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So send them along if you got them. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Judy.
Great. Thank you, Laura. And I'm happy to be here today and moderate this discussion between members of the Yarn Wire, two members of the Yarn Wire today, Laura and Russell, and Ryan. So I thought we'd start with how you all met. I kind of know the story. I was there. So I'd like to maybe hear you talk about your interactions at Stony Brook when you first met, and then we'll kind of move to questions about the inception of this piece and so forth. So Ryan, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah. So I've known Yarn Wire since the beginning days of Yarn Wire. We were all at Stony Brook together. I did my master's at Stony Brook from 2005 to 2007. And so I was there doing graduate work at the same time as all the original members of Yarn Wire were there. So yeah, we met back in those early days of grad school. And then I wrote one piece for them, one of the kind of earliest pieces that they did as an ensemble, this piece, Filthy Machines. When I was doing my master's, so in like 2006, that's how we all know each other from those days.
Great title.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You come up with really great titles, Ryan.
Thanks.
I remember getting that score and I was just like, whoa, okay. That's intense.
So maybe that would be an opportunity for you, Laura and Russell, to kind of talk about, the beginnings of Yarn Wire and how Ryan sort of intersected with that.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, I remember you in the basement. The basement of Stony Brook is where the percussion department is, and we just all kind of mull about down there. And I remember you down there, poking your head in the studios and always hanging out. So it was like bound to happen that we would work together in a way, And I think, Yarn Wire in those days when we were students, we were of course working on existing repertoire for the ensemble, but the most natural next thing to happen is to work with your colleagues and friends. And so, you were there, we're like, let's do something. And it was great.
Yeah, it was kind of doing what students should do. It's kind of what we always tell, students that we work with in any capacity. When you're starting out, if you're interested in new music, make sure you take the advantage of being in school by, working with as many colleagues as you can. And Stony Brook is so fortunate in that way, or it's a department that's really prime for that, that there's all these composers wandering around in the basement where the percussionists and new music adjacent people, I will say. I spent a lot of time in the basement too. So, we all kind of find each other, and it's that really sort of like nice lab environment where things percolate naturally, I think.
And it's, another thing that we always say, Laura, is, you are going to maintain these friendships and relationships well beyond. And here we are on a Zoom call in 2020. But also, it wasn't your last piece for us, Ryan.
Right.
We continue to work and keep in touch.
Right. So the work we want to talk about today is the work that appears on this album, When All Else Fails. And so was composed in 2017.
16.
16.
Sorry,
right,
I guess,
16.
yeah, actually, sorry, I think I think I'd maybe show the date as 2017 because that's maybe when I kind of finished it up, but I was working
Okay.
on it sort of toward the end of 16. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay. We have to be precise. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about the circumstances by which you wrote this piece and the kind of things that you had in mind, and then we'll kind of get into more of the details of the piece.
Yeah. So, I had worked with Yarn Wire previously, and then after that, we had kind of talked about doing another piece together at some point. And then in 2016, I was talking with Yarn Wire about bringing them to Hamilton College, where I teach, to have them perform on the Performing Arts series. And so that seemed like a good opportunity to have them work with my students and also write a new piece for them. So those are kind of the circumstances in which this emerged. In terms of the piece and kind of what was going on in terms of a musical context, how it came to be that I started working with these kinds of ideas. It has a lot to do with my background as a pianist and writing a lot of prior piano music. Piano is my main instrument. I'm not a very good pianist, but it's my main instrument, and I've played it a lot and I've composed a lot for it. And there's one particular thing that I have used a lot in a lot of my piano music previously. I've used a lot of the sostenuto pedal, the middle pedal, which is supposed to hold down certain notes but not let other notes ring. And I've used that extensively in a lot of my past piano music. And as it turns out, that pedal just is prone to mechanical failure. It tends to just not work a lot of the times. And so it will allow some notes to ring when they should not. And I had kind of developed a musical language that was built out of largely having kind of two layers of sound. One sound layer that's very short sounds that tend to be kind of fast and soft, and then one sound layer that is sort of longer held sounds that ring for a long time. And in my prior piano music, that always relied heavily on this one pedal that had a tendency to fail. And so I decided with this piece that before I came up with anything else about what it would be like musically, I decided I will not use the sostenuto pedal. I will do anything else I can, but not use that. So that was kind of the initial impetus for how I started thinking about it in terms of musical material.
Nice.
I love that.
Great. So what were you expecting, Laura and Russell, when you went into this project, or were you expecting anything?
Well, I remember actually, Ryan, maybe you remember this too. Like we met for beers at Valhalla in Hell's Kitchen back when people could do such things, and to talk kind of about the piece. And I think we were just like, yeah, do whatever you want. We're not going to give you too many restrictions. Maybe talk to Ian and Russell about percussion instruments and what they've got and what they don't have and what we can't get or we could get. But I remembered Ryan's music, and I know he works a lot with electronic music. So I knew that there would be something rhythmically and timbrally interesting, but I didn't know exactly what that might be.
I was a little concerned because with the previous piece, Filthy Machines, there were so many notes. We're students, and it's just like you're gonna go for it, and then as a performer, you're just down in the basement practicing all the time. But it was still just like too many notes, and like it was really hard. And I was like, what are we getting ourselves into? And the program that we were bringing to Hamilton was also like really intense. So I was just like, okay, what is this? But then when you sent the music and we started playing it, it like had this deep groove, and I was really excited and like pretty pleasantly surprised, I thought. And also, the occasion of this piece was one in which we got to work with Jacob Rodebeck again, who you've known for a long time also, who was one of our original pianists in Yarn Wire. And so it was like not only the piece, but the whole experience was this kind of really beautiful kind of experience because it kind of looped us back into working together. Everyone had changed a little bit. musically, but like, you know, for the better. And it was really good time. Then listening to the recording, I don't know what you did to it to like juice it up, but man, it, like that opening, it's really fun.
Yeah. So we were going to hear a little bit of the music and something from Jacob, the other pianist in this. And just to reiterate what Russell said, that Jacob Rodebeck was the original pianist of the group, and then Ning has been the pianist for a long time now. But
that's right.
It was a kind of unusual circumstance that he got to come back and sort of work with it. And he's the pianist on the recording too, as I understand.
Yeah.
So I also heard from Ryan a little bit of a story, which I described to him as the composer going to the percussionist candy store, learning about what can be done in the studio. So I heard that there was one of these events where Ryan came and looked at all the candy and decided what he'd like to use.
We try to discourage this nowadays. Just kidding. What did you meet with Ian, or was I there too? It was so long ago, but I remember we literally played with something that looks like candy, which is a super ball. It looks like a lollipop, and we played with that. And on the tom-tom head, we played with putting beads on things. I feel like
the beads.
That's in the piece. Yeah, and a veggie brush.
Oh, the veggie
right. We tried out a bunch of stuff. I should also note I have a background as a percussionist. I played percussion back in high school, and I haven't played in a long time. I would not call myself a percussionist anymore. But when I played percussion, I was in competitive marching band and drum corps, and I played mostly in the pit in the front line where people are playing mostly mallet percussion instruments. Mm-hmm. So I used to play a lot of marimba and xylophone and vibraphone. Traditional techniques, basically just playing as loud as you possibly can because you're in the middle of a football field and you can't hear things. So I was never really dealing with a whole lot of subtle kind of techniques. But my music since high school has kind of tended toward more subtle explorations of timbre. And so, I went to the studio and I met with both Russell and Ian and just wanted to try out different things, different techniques on the vibraphone. Yeah. Some of which are kind of well-known techniques that I hadn't seen up close. So using these like rasping kind of sticks to make a kind of sound and, bending subtle pitch bends with a moleskin mallet. Yeah. But I think we had the most fun with the, I think they were called pony beads. Right? They're these little tiny plastic colorful beads, which are, I think, not intended for making music, but if you scatter them on the head of a tom and then you rub a super ball along the head, it does this thing where you can make the drum head kind of go like that. But with the beads, they also vibrate, so it gets this kind of right. Yeah. And a fun thing that we realized later, you can hear this in the recording. If you hit the tom hard enough, then the beads some of them will fly off and scatter, and then you'll hear them bouncing around on the floor. So the first moment where you hear the tom actually played on the head, you can hear a little kind of petering out of little plastic beads. Yeah.
You can tell when this piece is from, in a way, because like the reason we had a jar of those in a percussion studio is because there's a piece by Thomas Meadowcroft where he has us put them on speakers. So it's a little bit similar but different, and we just have this stuff and they're so beautiful to look at. And then we had never put them on an acoustic instrument. And I thought it was pretty effective because there's a visual element, but also that kind of sizzle is pretty cool. Yeah.
This might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the preparation of the piano in advance of us hearing the opening, which is a pretty cool timbre that's there. That's you're kind of like, how is it done? I had to look at the score and kind of figure it out, for that. And then Ryan and I talked about it. But Laura, maybe you talk a little bit about the preparation for the piano.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the simplest and honestly, in some ways, the most effective like extended technique on the piano, at least in my opinion, I guess, is the way that it can produce harmonics. The sound of harmonics on the piano are particularly interesting and beautiful because they have such a different character in the lower register of the instrument. It sounds really, they're so rich and resonant and sort of haunting. And in the middle register, middle to upper register, they have this much more sort of pure, ghostly kind of quality. And so I think Ryan is really exploiting that with the way he's using extended techniques. So and he helps it out by also sort of imitating the rich partials that you get, that Cage was often trying to get when he would have you insert things between the strings. So the sort of non-invasive, non-damaging solution to that is to use, and actually, Ryan, I think you came up with this, and we've counseled people on this technique since, which is to take a dime or a penny or other small coin. I guess you could use like a centime from the euro.
Quarters.
Yeah, maybe quarters might sometimes on the low strings those might work.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, in
Score
fact,
had quarters.
the performance notes do say specifically what coin to put on each
Yes.
string. So
That's
sometimes
right,
it's
yeah.
a dime, sometimes it's a penny, sometimes it's a quarter.
Depending on the width
Depending
of
on the
the
string,
strings.
yeah, whether it's one string or three strings, yeah.
Yeah, and then like a very thin coating or piece of blue tack, poster putty, and you just plop it on the string, and you can prepare it that way, and it sounds great. It sounds so cool, and it's awesome because it's not damaging to the piano, but it just completely changes the timbre of the pitches you're playing. And I believe there are also just some traditionally played harmonics. I think also I remember that I'm playing on the low strings near the beginning, but yeah, it's just a really, really beautiful effect. I love it.
So maybe this is the opportunity to hear the beginning of it, and then it will go into Jacob's. Got a little message for people, right?
That's right.
So.
Awesome.
That's great. So, shall we hear Jacob's message now?
Yeah.
So Jacob couldn't be here today, unfortunately. So he sent over a message. He wanted to let you know, the audience know, like his experience of putting it back together, and what he thought about the piece during the process. So here's Jacob.
Hi everyone, this is Jacob Rodebeck. Thank you to Yarnwire, Judy, and Ryan for having me on this episode of Feedback. Ryan's piece came together so smoothly. Part of what struck me about it was that it was one of the first pieces I've played in an ensemble setting that I felt like really had a groove. It begins with such that settled pulse that does eventually unravel, but lasts long enough to really dig into it. And I love that part of the piece. I remember one of the most challenging aspects, though, for me was the moments where that pulse begins to shift. And the first time it happens in the piece, and you hear it in the recording, I think it was Laura who had the accelerating part. I found myself having to consciously redirect my attention to the steadiness of the percussion parts to play my part accurately. Because I was so attuned to the piano sound that it was everything I could do not to follow not to follow it. Um, the musical effect of these passages I found going back and revisiting the piece is really kind of miraculously similar for both performers and listeners. I mean, at least speaking to my experience playing it and my ear listening to it now. Throughout the piece, I find Ryan's sense and warping of time to be its most striking feature. For example, the unexpected arrivals, like when the ensemble comes back together in the middle of the piece, the pianos have that high tinkling sound on the muted upper strings, and then it gradually comes back to that settled beat. It's quicker at that point, but it just all clicks, and it's so satisfying in the course of the piece, and it's those moments that keep drawing the listener forward. So it was a joy to play it, and I was so thrilled to have had the opportunity to come back with Yarnwire and get to work together again on this project, and I'm very thankful to be a part of this episode. So it's truly a pleasure to revisit the piece. And I'm sorry I didn't get to speak with everyone today in person, but I wish you all good health, peace, and love in this season. And thank you again to Yarnwire, Judy, and Ryan for having me on this episode.
Great. Thank you,
Nice.
Jacob. Maybe this is a good opportunity to talk about some of the, I mean, there's reference in Jacob's statement here about the differing times senses that are operating, and maybe talk a little bit about your idea of how that is managed over the course of the movement. And the places, there's some fairly long pauses during it too, which are interesting. And I kept wanting to see the performance, which, an important part of seeing what's happening in silences, right? But maybe you can talk about your kind of overall conception of it, and especially with relationship to issues of these differing time senses that are happening.
Yeah. I would say I've been kind of intrigued by time for a long time. A lot of my fairly recent work sort of deals a lot with technology and different kinds of glitches and failures, and there's the one kind of mechanical failure that I talked about as being sort of the initial impetus behind the piece. But an idea that I keep coming back to as a composer, especially when I work with small chamber ensembles, is sort of independence and coordination, the extent to which parts are sort of coordinated with each other, the extent to which they don't line up with each other. And I think maybe this is one of those reasons that I love working with small chamber ensembles, like 3 or 4 or 5 people is kind of, a lot of my work is within that sort of range, because you can really get the sense of the individual people on stage interacting in some way where you can hear all the counterpoint. It's not too thick, but there's also enough sort of independence of voices to get really rich polyrhythmic effects. So what I think Jacob was talking about toward the end of his recording there was actually the next section that I was thinking we might listen to at some point, which is a section where there is a steady pulse in the vibraphone, but using a very light stick, so it's kind of a very articulate, tinkly, but not very loud kind of sound. And then in the pianos, both of them are playing mostly in the very highest register. You can see the score there. They're playing in the highest register, but I have them mute those strings. So you hear mostly just the initial attack. It's actually a very percussive sound, a dry kind of wooden percussive sound at the top end of the piano. And what they're doing is they're playing very fast material that sometimes locks in rhythmically with the vibraphone and sometimes doesn't. And also, as a result, sometimes locks in with each other, the two piano parts, and sometimes they don't. So you have this thing where they're kind of moving in and out of phase and creating these complex, sort of swirling interactions between the layers, but then sometimes they sort of line up and lock in and then fall back out of alignment.
Right. So do you have that passage queued up? Can we listen to it?
Yeah, we can
Absolutely.
absolutely take a listen to that.
Mm-hmm. Just bringing it up. I love those out of tune, like prepared things in the bass of the piano.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This piece was actually recorded in this space, I think, right?
Yeah.
In
Yes, it
Troutman
was.
Hall, right here. And so I hear those pianos and I'm like, man, did we not tune those things? But no, it's in the score.
Yeah, it's in the score. I do a bunch of stuff, talking now about pitches, about notes. I do a bunch of stuff where because we have two pianos, you could have one pianist playing a note, in tune, but you could have another pianist playing a note that has been prepared with one of these coins, so that what you're hearing is a particular partial, a particular overtone, but it's not going to be in tune with the equally tempered piano.
Yeah.
So you can have the same note and it's slightly out of tune with each other, and you wonder why, and it's just the two different instruments playing sort of the same note but not exactly.
Yeah, it's cool.
Cool. Yeah.
That's
Maybe,
the poor man's solution to retuning a piano in quarter tones.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, no, it takes coins, so it's not. You can't be that poor.
Right.
Not a
So
lot of money.
maybe it would be good for Laura and Russell to talk about, the things that you did to bring this piece together. What were the challenges? What was easy, or maybe it was all easy. I don't know. Too many notes.
That's very Emperor from what's the Amadeus, right? That moment in the movie when after the Mozart
Too many
premiere.
notes.
Too many notes. No, I feel like this piece, I mean, there were things about it that were easy to put together. The stuff that's very straight, like the beginning of the piece, it's very easy to put together in terms of rehearsal. I think those moments of sort of where you have unity and disunity, I like using that word that's been floating around a lot in these episodes. I love those moments, and they're more challenging definitely to put together, but I think in a group like ours where we're used to playing together so frequently. We are fortunate to be able to kind of shortcut that process in some ways and come up with solutions quickly. And it's kind of more about personal responsibility in a way. Like, got to play my part the way it needs to be played. And if I can do that, then I trust my bandmates that it'll all work out.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, looking back at Filthy Machines, that piece was so difficult for us to put together at that time because we hadn't really been playing together that much, right? And creating new works was kind of a new thing, right? And then in contrast, this piece, as people who've been playing together for so long, like Laura said, it's just we were able to know, okay, who's going to cue what, who are we going to follow, and instead of worrying about the piece as a whole, you really focus on the problem sections and try to find solutions. And having all that rehearsal under our belt, I think really helped with that process. So instead of like worrying necessarily about how we're going to make it, it was more about, getting to enjoy making the sounds that you put in the piece, which are all really fun sounds to make, and we could really focus more about the performance and making the music happen. So it was a great experience.
So I'm assuming that you all put the piece together in New York, and then you traveled up to Hamilton. And did you have a lot of rehearsal there? Did anything get changed as a consequence of the rehearsal there with Ryan?
I feel like the changes happened here more, right, Ryan?
Okay.
And maybe with the hall sound, we were dealing with balance and trying to hear it in that space. I do remember the drive up, it started snowing.
Oh, that's
and,
right. Yeah.
And that it's always a little sketchy when you're touring somewhere and it starts snowing. So that was in the back of my mind. I don't think I brought enough layers. And but we got in the hall, and there wasn't that much time, I feel like, but enough to feel it. And then when we came back and recorded it, I don't think many changes happened then either.
No. Yeah, I think I remember it when you came up for the concert. The piece had been put together by that point, and there weren't really any changes. We had some time in the hall, but I don't think we had a lot of time upstate before the actual concert. But the piece is already together, and then. When we recorded it in sections, of course. But yeah, I don't think we really need to adjust much in the recording session.
No.
Mostly about finding good microphone placement to get, a lot of these sounds. Russell, you were talking about like the extra juice. I really didn't put much studio magic on it. Most of the tracks on this album, I didn't record them myself. Mostly they were tracked and mixed by other engineers. This is the only track on the album that I actually mixed myself. And then it was Ryan Strieber at Octaven who did all the mastering. But in terms of when I was actually mixing that recording that we made, I didn't really change much at all. It's mostly just a lot of these sounds, if you get the microphone close enough, you get in the right position, you really hear the texture of the sound. And then, if you kind of boost that, I did adjust levels to bring out some of the details of those sounds, but you can really hear them. I think that's in the recording session, we're mostly kind of focused on that.
Yeah. And congrats on the recording, by the way. It's
Thanks.
really amazing. It sounds really great.
Thanks.
Yeah. It's quite a collection of both performers and, and pieces. So it's a pleasure to listen to it. So, I don't think we told the story about the Steinway B and the Steinway D yet.
Yeah.
So that might be worth telling.
Yeah. Speaking of adjustments, I think we did
Right.
have to make some adjustments there.
True.
I think, Laura, you...
Yeah. So every time we work with a composer, one of the standard sort of spiels is, while we don't want to exert any, we don't want to put any limits on your artistic imagination or genius or creativity or whatever. There are things we'd ask you to keep in mind about extended piano techniques. And one of the big ones is that the inside of every piano is different. And it's not just different based on the brand or maker of the piano. So, Steinways are different from Yamaha. Yamahas are different from Bosendorfer. Bosendorfer is different than Baldwin, if you still get one of those every now and then. And even within makers, models are different. So what Judy's saying, the Steinway D is your typical 9-foot concert grand, which is what many places have in their concert hall. And a Steinway B is, I think, 7 feet, right? About 7, maybe 7'1" or something like that. And so it's a little bit smaller. It's still a really nice instrument. But a lot of things that you can do on one, they don't work on another. And I think that happened to us, right? We had to make some sort of last minute adjustments. But it's always possible. That's also the very cool thing about harmonics is it might not be exactly the partial you want, but you can usually find it in another spot on a different string. And you do the sort of the 4th grade solution of just writing the note name in your part instead of reading the note on the
Fourth grade,
staff.
that's what I always do.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
But even George Crumb suffers from this problem. Music for a Summer Evening actually is not playable as written on a Steinway D. You really need a Steinway B or smaller in order to do all those strums in the middle movement. So.
Yeah, I thought I had planned things out. Speaking of failure, which is kind of a thread through a lot of my work, I have a Steinway O at home, which is a lot smaller. But I have access to Bs, and the main issue has to do with if you're putting these little coins on blue tack on a string. The question is, can you access that particular string, or is it underneath a big iron bar? And I had tested out the different positions I was putting coins for my piano and for a Steinway B, and I had charts, and I thought I had checked out every possibility, but then if I remember correctly, I didn't even find out until after the concert. I think, Laura, you told me after the concert that, oh, by the way, a handful of these positions where you want me to put a coin, you can't get to on a D. It works on a B, but not on a D. So I had to make some changes, but I didn't even notice. So it turned out fine. Whatever you did to find other nodes on other strings, it all worked out.
Oh yeah, I'm like a MacGyver when it comes to finding different solutions to those kinds of problems at this point.
I was going to say something more like the performer as magician, right? You got to pull the rabbit out of the hat. No matter what happens, you've got to make it happen. So.
Exactly.
No, this always happens with the piano parts, actually. It's like no matter how much planning, I've heard it so many times from the back of the stage. It's like, oh, I can't reach that, and it's always a bad situation when the composer gets very freaked out about it. But you did not, obviously, and to know that this is a possibility. I think it's important for composers to know that. It's like we know what you're after, but sometimes it just can't happen. And when all else fails, you have to find a
I was waiting for that.
This became a long-running game is to see how often you could work that phrase in the conversation.
And so that brings up the question of the title.
Yeah, the title is kind of just a reference to this recurring theme in my music, which we've talked about my piano music. And this particular mechanical failure of the pedal. There had been a piece I'd written for solo piano called Errata, which was a piece that was really about my inability to play that piece. It's a piece that starts with this one gesture. It's also on the Kairos album. It was commissioned by an Italian pianist, Emanuele Torquati, for the Heidelberg Spring Festival. And it's just solo acoustic piano, but it begins with this quick gesture that if I play it over and over again, I'm going to start making mistakes. And so what I did when I was composing that piece was just play this gesture over and over again and start cataloging the mistakes I made, and then use that as kind of the initial material for the opening section. So my piano music often has a lot to do with failure. And then a lot of my other work which kind of engages technology and emerging technologies and sort of different things that can happen with emerging technologies. Frequently incorporates sort of ideas of digital glitches. So the first piece on that album for the Jack Quartet, Too Many Arguments in line 17, the initial material is based on this experience of watching a video on YouTube that wasn't buffering properly. And so it would play a little bit and then it would stop and go back a little bit and play a little bit and stop and go back a little bit. So there's this kind of weird digital glitch. So the title, When All Else Fails, is just kind of a reference to this recurring experience of finding failure as a sort of productive springboard for inspiration.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we're getting toward the end of our time here. I wonder if there's anything else that people want to say, or if there's any other questions that might be lingering in your mind or in your ears or or in your eyes.
It's really interesting. It's such a cool byproduct of these talks and these episodes that I always, at the end, I'm like, man, when are we going to be able to play that piece again? It's
really.
so cool. Like, it really, it's so amazing to be able to do this, but it does really, it like stirs this like kind of painful, bittersweet feeling inside of me. Like, I really miss playing music together. So,
Well, the last time I joined you here, it was September, I think early September. Right. And we did not have a future then.
That's right.
We now have a future.
That's right.
And it's just, we just need our patience to realize that future. So, I mean,
it's coming.
There's reason for hope, shall we say.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that brings it up. You got another piece in mind for Yarn Wire, Ryan?
Hey, there you go.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Yeah, when we start all making music again, I could do another piece at some point. That a bunch of my work lately has been work that involves audience participation using motion-controlled interactive electronic sounds on mobile devices. So everyone in the audience is instructed to get out their phone and go to a website that I built that communicates with a server I built that the musicians on stage can control. And so the musicians on stage can send cues to all the devices in the audience. And you have people who are able to shake their phones or tilt them in different positions to make sound that is essentially the electronic component of a chamber piece, but the people on stage are able to control what array of sounds are available on the devices. I've kind of been doing a bunch of that stuff lately.
Nice.
So maybe piece for Yarn Wire and phones at some point when we can start getting together. That that's a thing that really relies on having an audience there. I mean, we can do it live stream. Actually, the next piece I'm gonna have premiered. I have a piece that's going to be premiered by the Society for New Music in January, and it's looking like that's not going to be a live concert situation. So people will be at home. And you could be participating from home. You can have a device that is still able to communicate with the same server because it works over the internet. It's not a local network in the hall. And so people at home will be able to participate over the live stream in real time. That's awesome. But they'll only hear their own device. They won't hear this whole, aggregate sound of all these dozens or hundreds of devices. So this is a project that kind of, on the one hand, it works well in terms of the technology over the internet, and it seems like a perfect fit for an era of live stream concerts. But on the other hand, I think it misses something if you don't have the people in the audience all together experiencing this thing at once. So
that's right.
Once we all
everyone
can
to
get together,
download some stuff. And debug. No, I'm just kidding. It's a terrible idea.
Ryan, do you have a date for that in January for our viewers so they can check it out?
Yeah, it's January 31st, I believe. Let me check to make sure.
Yeah, send us a link. We can put it in the comments.
Yeah, Sunday, January 31st will be the premiere of a piece for chamber ensemble with phones.
Awesome.
Great.
Cool.
And on that note, Judy, is there anything upcoming for you that you'd like to give a little shout or plug for?
We're just about ready to publish a book of collected essays called Sound and Affect. What is it? Voice, Music, World.
Oh,
be out with
wonderful.
University of Chicago Press.
Excellent.
Just finishing up the page proofs right now. So
Oh,
Perfect.
I'm really excited about it. So
yeah. Congrats
great.
and best of luck with that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up our conversation for today. And thanks so much to both of you, Ryan and Judy, for being here. It's really so wonderful to talk with you both and to revisit this piece together. It's really kind of a heartwarming thing also to have another Stony Brook moment on this series.
Love
It's good reminders of our origin.
That's right.
For those of you watching, we do have another episode coming up tomorrow, Friday, December 11th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you'll see us chatting with Han Kai Wang, a multimedia artist based in Taiwan, and Marina Rosenfeld, a composer and sound artist that's based here in New York City, who wrote for us just 1 year. It feels like not that long ago, but it was just about a little more than a year ago. So we'll be talking with them tomorrow at 3 p.m. So if you're watching, don't forget to follow our channel, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss an episode. And if you would like to support this project, please visit us at patreon.com. In exchange for your support, you get access to very cool benefits, handcrafted or handmade items. Well, handcrafted in the sense that we made them ourselves. They're not actual crafts, but
Yeah, I don't know how to knit.
unfortunately.
I can make an audio file.
And we have also entered the season of our annual fundraising campaign. So any donation that you're able to make to Yarnwire, we would appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts. Just visit our website, www.yarnwire.org. Thanks to everyone for watching and have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.